Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 501. Over the 500 mark. Here we go. Let's see what's next. 1,000. Yes, we'll get to that presently. 501 for the 27th of May 2018. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia on a very nice looking day outside. I'm a little bit, a little bit tired. Had a late shift last night doing some research work for the New South Wales government at the Vivid Festival of Lights in Sydney. We have thousands and thousands of people crowded downtown to look at light displays until very late. It's quite an event. Coming up on this week's show, we're going to interview an old friend of mine, Sharon Hill. Sharon Hill, who until recently was doing doubtful news, still doing lots of skeptical stuff. And Sharon Hill is coming to Australia to take part in Paracon, coming up next month. And she'll also be visiting Melbourne. All the details coming up with Sharon Hill at the top of the show. Following that, we have a report or a plea, a call for help from Choice magazine, who are fighting the good fight when it comes to regulation concerning packaging on medicine. How should it be labelled? What claims can it make? What claims should it make or should not make? And how you, if you're in Australia, can help with this Choice campaign. Then to round off the show, the return of the Cass Files with Dr Cassandra Perryman. She's going to be looking at what is truth, or more importantly, why do people hang on to lies, or why do people keep believing things that are demonstrably untrue, or, I think you get the idea. It's always a psychological adventure with Dr Cassandra Perryman, and that's coming up to wrap up the show. Now, folks, as a little reward to myself, after the last show 500 went out to the waiting world, I took a few days off and visited my friend Jim Wilshire. He's this man.
Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
And he lives on a little property, a little farmhouse near the city of Albury in New South Wales, along the beautiful Murray River. And what a treat it is to relax down there on a farm for a few days. After 500 episodes, I think I deserved a few days to get myself together. Thanks, Jim. I hope to see you again a bit later on in the year. And thank you to all the people who sent in messages of congratulations on Facebook and in person and on Twitter and everywhere else for the Skeptic Zone reaching the 500 episode milestone mark. Stay tuned at the end of the show for more messages from me. But now it's time for me to run downstairs and have some lemon tea. Feeling still a little bit tired after last night. It was a very late night. And I'm up early this morning to record the introduction for the show before the flight path or the flight corridor which goes over the studios opens up for Sydney Airport. Because then every 3 or 4 minutes, a whacking great jumbo jet or a A380 or whatever comes over. But while I enjoy my lemon tea, I might have lemon and ginger tea. I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Joining me now all the way from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I have not visited Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, but if I do, I'd certainly call on Sharon Hill. Hello, Sharon.
Hi, Richard. It's good to talk to you.
Yes, it's been a while since we've had a chat. Normally, I have the pleasure of bumping into you at something like the Amazing Meeting or various conventions, but not recently, I don't think. What has Sharon Hill been up to? And I understand that you're not concentrating on doubtful news at the moment.
That's right. We sort of wrapped that up. maybe it ran its course. Maybe the whole fake news thing just sort of overwhelmed everybody. And I decided to move on to a couple new things. And I finished a new book, my first book, called Scientifical Americans.
Yeah.
And it's about the culture of amateur paranormal investigators. So it's about how sort of like science and how they understand science, how they try to use science. So it's more about the public understanding of science, but focusing in on those paranormal researchers and what they do.
Yeah.
And I've also started a new website called spookygeology.com.
Ooh, yeah.
And yeah, we could talk about that. And just been blogging on my own and reading lots of books and listening to podcasts and reading lots of magazines. That's what I like to do.
That doesn't sound too bad at all. Now let's have a chat about the book. Is that available right now?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes. It came out at the very, very end of last year.
Ah.
And, you can look it up on Amazon, Scientifical Americans. It's sort of a play on Scientific Americans because what I saw these people doing was not quite science. It was sort of scientifical, sciencey stuff.
Yes, well, look, folks, I will link to the link there to Sharon's book on the on this week's show notes. But let's just chat about this for a little while, Sharon, because I find this a very fascinating topic, and I have been on more than my fair share of ghost investigations with the paranormal crew.
Right.
With their black T-shirts, which they seem to like, or their camouflage gear. Lovely people, by the way, but we, Maynard and I, in fact, and our friend Alethea Dean, we went for a night here in Sydney in the Fields of Mars Cemetery, where all sorts of spooky things didn't really happen, but they had no end of gadgets, gizmos, and all sorts of things that made lights and noises.
Right. That's part of the whole sciencey thing. They're sort of conjuring this image of scientific authority with the gadgets and with this sense of being systematic and collecting data and getting evidence and using a lot of jargon as well as the gadgets. And these are the sort of ways that they conjure that scientific authority, and the public kind of falls for it. They tend to see them as some sort of paranormal experts and professionals. And that's kind of unfortunate, but it does show that these people are kind of trying to use science. They're just falling short. So in the book, I talk about not only ghost hunters, but also cryptozoologists and ufologists who sort of do the same thing in a different way. Each of the fields is slightly different. And I talk about how science has sort of looked at these fields already and discovered that there isn't really anything there to investigate. So when the scientists left, the public is still really interested in this, and the amateurs filled that void. And now that if you think you've seen a Bigfoot, or if you've spotted a UFO, or if you think your house is haunted, you call on these amateur investigators and they come right over.
Now, I'm not trying to be funny here, well, not necessarily, but if folks just can visualize maybe a scene from Ghostbusters where the heroes strolling through the haunted location and they're looking at their gadgets in their arms and they go, toot, 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 and lights are flashing. Well, it's not too far removed from that, and I'm not trying to send it up, but just in reality, that's what the sort of thing you get.
Yeah, I'd hate to say it, but it's true that Ghostbusters has actually influenced a couple people.
Right.
It looks really cool.
And have you come across these wonderful devices? Now, what were they called? I think it was called a spirit box, which is a machine, if we're thinking about the same machine, which rapidly scans AM frequencies. Mm-hmm. Like that, and if it comes across a word, it plays the word, then moves on to the next frequency.
Right, you get those little snippets of sound, and then your brain sort of puts them together, and it feels like it makes sense. It feels like something ethereal is speaking to you. There's a lot of pareidolia involved in ghost hunting in particular, that in all their data, they see something that isn't really there. So they sort of imprint their entire worldview on it, and they get something out of it where the rest of us are like, I don't see it. I've had people send me EVPs, electronic voice phenomenon, that they record. They don't hear it, when they record it, but then they hear it afterwards as sort of like clicks and glitches and stuff, but they hear words. And I've had people send me these EVPs and says, this is absolutely crystal clear. And what I'll do is I'll just put my hand over the YouTube clip, which has the speech at the bottom translated, and I'll try and listen to what it is, and I can never make it out.
Yeah. Now, just for the benefit of listeners, maybe new to the skeptical worlds and all this sort of thing, can you give a brief overview of what pareidolia is?
Right. People have this tendency to see particular patterns in noise. We have a particular tendency to see faces in things like trees and rocks and inanimate objects. And the term pareidolia means that you are seeing a figure, you're making sense of something that isn't really what you think it is, but your brain is sort of filling in the gaps and making it look like a face or an animal or a Bigfoot. Or in the case of sound, it's also doing the same thing. It's filling in those gaps, and it's trying to match, your brain is trying to match up with patterns that it already knows. And it's just a human trait, and it serves us pretty well, especially if we're out in a dangerous situation and we encounter some sound or visual that could signal danger. It's a good thing to have. But of course, in our society today, we kind of go overboard with it. We are so much stimulus around us, and we tend to see patterns in noise that aren't really there.
Yes, that's a very good explanation, Sharon. That's exactly what it is. And as it happens, folks, I've got an example here of this thing we were discussing, the spirit box, which involves what we call audio pareidolia, where you hear random sounds and your brain tries to make sense of them. Have a listen to this.
Can somebody give us their name? Is that you, Steve? Is everyone okay that we're here? Are there any ladies here?
So there you go. That was a spirit box on a ghost investigation, a weird sort of sound. The human mind is fascinating on many levels, Sharon, but in our line, we certainly see it put to work, don't we?
Right. Like I said, these people are very genuine. They're passionate about what they do, and they're sort of committed to the idea that the paranormal is out there, and they're intent on finding it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the ones I've met, not only is it for them a social group they belong to of like-minded people, which we all do, which is very important for, we've evolved that way, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. But they feel they're doing something very important. They are actually contacting spirits or clearing out things or just making new discoveries for science. So to them, it gives them a very important sense of being, I think.
Very true. And that I do discuss that in the book. Becomes part of their identity. It's how they identify with other people and how they interact with the rest of the world. And it makes them feel very special. And I think that's really understandable. And I like to converse with them. I like to talk to them. I hope that maybe just these types of exchanges between us could be a way to help foster understanding between the groups.
Yeah, and again, I really appreciate the fact that you acknowledge that this is important to them. They're just acting like we all do from time to time. We latch onto something which is important to us, and we have that social bonding. So I can't wait. You're very kindly sending me a copy of the book, which I will read with glee, because I find these groups endlessly fascinating. And you often come across them when I do things like mind-body spirit conventions and things, where I visit. There'll be a table or two tables of the so-and-so ghost hunters group, or the paranormal investigations unit, or the ghost of they give themselves these names too. Right,
and that's part of the authority that they use. They give themselves important names, acronyms, titles. It makes them sound very credible.
It really does. Now, what's this about geology?
Well, I am a geologist, and I figured I probably should talk a little bit about geology in relation to paranormal topics because the two interact, and they interact in sort of an interesting way. I mean, spookiness about geology, I can think of a lot of topics that cover ideas about places and natural phenomenon that people sometimes believe have magical or mystical or supernatural causes, but instead they may have actual physical geological causes. So I decided to start a website and start researching these topics and see what I could find. So what I talk about on this site are things like alternative geological explanations, so like the flat earth, which involves not only sometimes religious beliefs, but also conspiratorial beliefs as well. And things like earth energies. People think that the earth has some sort of energy lines. So that's connected to ideas of ghost lights, such as the Min lights in Queensland.
Oh, yes.
And of course, dowsing is said to be following lines of energy in the earth. And you have these energy vortexes where you can have these spiritual experiences. And there's also places that have so-called mystical powers like Delphi in Greece or Uluru in Australia, which is a very spiritual place. And people feel that they have these interesting experiences there.
Absolutely.
I also talk about things like so-called gates to the underworld, where people think that they could actually enter the underworld, or gates to hell. And a curious recent example that I just wrote about was the eruptions in Hawaii that are going on right now. And what we see is the prompting of people to start making gifts to give to the goddess Pele to try to stop the eruptions.
Ooh.
And that's an interesting spiritual and mythical aspect to a very natural geologic phenomenon. So that's the kind of things that I talk about.
Well, that's more there than I would have thought, but you're absolutely right. It does tie in a lot with the paranormal when we think of what they call the ley lines, for example, or earth energies, E-rays, I've heard, all this sort of thing. And certainly around the world, things like Uluru or Ayers Rock have strong spiritual connections to people. So, yeah, what a fascinating topic.
I don't think I'll ever run out of topics for that because I think that I've made my list complete, and I just find more every day. Right now I'm working on a long piece. It turned out to be longer than I thought, about places with the devil in their names.
Ooh.
So devil places, Devil's Tower, Devil's Kitchen, Devil's Den. And why do they have those names? So I start to talk about that. So that's what I'm working on right now. That'll be my next post on the site.
That's interesting. When I was a little boy growing up in a small country town, there was a tiny river a couple of miles out of town where I used to go on my bike, and we'd fish at Devil's Elbow, which was just a bend in, a bend in the river.
Yes. Yeah.
I never knew why.
Usually the nasty bends are called Devil's Elbow. There's also Devil's Windpipe and Devil's backbone and also the devil's parts.
There must be many of them around the world.
Too many, I discovered.
We'll have to look some up. Now, the exciting news for Sydney listeners and the terrible news for me is because I won't be here, and I'm really regretting that because I do so like to catch up with you. However, the good news for Sydney listeners is you're coming to town for Paracon Australia, which is on the weekend of the 16th of June, and you're going to be talking, that's at the Manly Quarantine Station, folks, for those Sydney listeners. That looks to be an exciting time. I've spoken at this conference myself before. A couple of years back, I was one of the guest speakers, and I had a wonderful time. Great people. I saw all sorts of interesting things, especially ghost hunters, and I bought a ghost laser. I must admit, I bought a laser which is designed to detect ghosts, which I have, which I think is really great. What can people expect when you come out, Sharon?
Well, I'm really excited. The first day, I'm giving a talk in the morning about misadventures in paranormal investigation. So it does sort of focus on the things that I talk about in the book, but it also includes some Well, what I'm trying to do is just develop a rapport with this crowd, which is they're all mostly going to be paranormal investigators. So it's a very different crowd that I normally speak to. So I want to make that connection, and I want to be able to have these discussions with them and sort of figure out what they're all about, and maybe they could figure out what I'm all about, and we can meet at some level and have some cool discussions. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then the second day, I'm going to be giving a lunch talk on spooky geology. And we're also doing a panel. Me and Paul Cropper and Tony Healy, we're doing a panel about the Yowie. So I'm really excited about that.
Maybe I should change my plans. I'm so sorry I won't be there. I'm going to send Maynard, our reporter Maynard, to go along. Yes. The goose of the Skeptic Zone, he should be there. And yes, again, I'm very jealous. Unfortunately, I won't be there, and I really want to be there. Folks, if you want to see Sharon Hill live in Australia, and it's she's worth seeing. She's a great speaker. I've had the pleasure of seeing her speak many times. Paraconaustralia.com is the website to go to for more information and to get your tickets, and I'll certainly link to that in the show notes.
Let me just add, for your Melbourne listeners, I will be making a side trip to Melbourne for the Australian Skeptics in Victoria meeting on Monday, the 18th of June.
That's great. Melbourne listeners, there you are. You don't have to buy your plane tickets to Sydney after all to see Sharon Hill. And the Vic Skeptics are a wonderful group of people. I've had the pleasure of speaking down there myself quite a few times. And I will link to that on the show notes. So there you are. Sydney and Melbourne, you're in for a treat. Change your plans. You know, if you're getting married that day, forget about it. Just cancel the wedding. It's worth it to see Sharon Hill. Sharon Hill, all the way from Harrisburg in Pennsylvania. Thank you very much for being on the Skeptic Zone.
Oh, you're very welcome. It was wonderful to talk to you, Richard.
You told me that aliens really exist.
Sziasztok!
Всем привет!
Hejsan allihop! Guys, I just had the most amazing experience.
What experience, Andras?
Andras, have you been to the pub? I told you not to hang out with Marsh. You know he was blessed by Peter Popov.
No, Yelena, I'm not talking about psychics. It was a real ESP experience.
You have been to the pub. Either that or you've been smoking something.
No, Pontus. The ESP is the European Skeptics podcast. It's the most amazing thing. You get to know so much about skeptics and their activities across Europe. You know, events, hot topics, and interviews with lots of interesting people.
Oh wow, cool. By the way, Pontus, you just committed the false dichotomy fallacy.
I guess that means I'm really wrong.
Yep. And you can even learn about those fallacies on the show and hear about people spreading silly ideas. You should really check it out. It's the ESP, the European Skeptics Podcast. It's on every week.
Alright, so where can I get this ESP experience? It sounds good.
You can go online at theesp.eu, follow it on Twitter at espodcast_EU, or like the podcast on Facebook. Oh, and you can also contact the show by sending them an email to info@theesp.eu. And if you want to subscribe, do a quick search for the European Skeptic Podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, or Stitcher.
I don't know how you can believe.
From our friends at Choice Magazine, put fact over fiction. Proposed laws could see dangerous and potentially misleading claims on therapeutic goods, especially complementary and alternative medicines like herbal and homeopathic treatments. It means that products can claim to decrease the time it takes to fall asleep or help maintain healthy heart function without having scientific evidence to back up their claims. To get our leaders' attention, we've produced our own vitamin bottles and labelled them with the claims vitamin companies are able to get away with under the proposed laws. If this legislation isn't stopped by the 25th of June 2018, products like these will be allowed to be sold in chemists and supermarkets. Tell senators to knock back these laws so Australians looking for vitamins and supplements can separate fact from fiction. The photograph accompanying the website, which I shall link to in the show notes, has medicine bottles labelled Bio-Essential, Heart Health, Sleep Well, Liver Detox. How did we get here? These laws arose from a 2015 review into medicines and medical devices. The review recommended that when making product claims, therapeutic goods companies must choose from a list of pre-approved claims. It also recommended that there needed to be a disclaimer alongside claims to communicate to consumers that the efficacy of the product had not been independently assessed and or is based on traditional use. While the federal government agreed to this recommendation, it was not implemented in the way it was envisaged. Rather than a concise list of claims backed by scientific evidence, the list is long and contains 1,017 claims for companies to use. Even more worryingly, only 140 of the claims are backed by scientific evidence. For the remaining 879 claims, evidence of, quote, traditional, and, quote, use is sufficient. That is, used for more than 3 generations in an alternative medical tradition, such as Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, or homeopathy. What's in the bottles? The vitamin bottles we've handed out are full of these sugary lollies, urging senators to stop sour claims and support scientific evidence in therapeutic goods. Can the industry be trusted? Loose regulation on product claims on therapeutic goods only serves to benefit industry players. In 2013, Swiss's, quote, Ulti-Boost appetite suppressant, end quote, was delisted by the Therapeutics Goods Administration, TGA, due to, quote, insufficient evidence to support the claims on the product, end quote. Within the same year, Swiss then relisted the exact same product, changing the label to include a, quote, traditional use, end quote, qualifier, to evade the requirements that claims are to be based on scientific evidence. What does Choice want? Australia is a multicultural country, and it is appropriate that we respect and allow access to alternative medical traditions. However, it is also important that Australians are protected from misleading claims. For consumers to be able to make an informed choice about complementary medicines, products displaying traditional use indications should be also required to display a prominent disclaimer on the label to the effect of, quote, this product's traditional claims are based on alternative health practices that are not accepted by most modern medical experts. There is no good scientific evidence that this product works, end quote. This is in line with disclaimers used by the United States Federal Trade Commission for homeopathic products. Keep therapeutic claims honest. Tell senators to knock back these proposed laws so that Australians looking for vitamins and supplements can separate fact from fiction. This form, and the form is right here on the website, will let you email the senators in your state or territory. Put your details below and click Email My Senators. There's the message for Australian listeners. SkepticZone.tv is the website where I will include in this week's show notes a link to this page put out by Choice Magazine, and you can see the lollies, the candy they've produced with these extravagant health claims. And you can email your senator.
Hey Richard, Dr. Paulie here, your favourite legal drug dealer. I just wanted to say big congratulations on reaching 500 episodes. It's really no wonder that you're Australia's top skeptical icon. And I hope you keep rocking our skeptical minds for at least another 500 episodes.
The Cass Files with Dr Cassandra Perryman.
Hello, and welcome back to the long overdue next episode of The Cass Files with Dr. Cassandra Perryman. Today, we're going to ask, why do people believe in obvious lies? Today, we're not going to talk about just any lies. We're going to specifically talk about the lies told about the current president of the United States. Yes, we're going to have a Californian discuss Trump. Now, voting tendencies aside, it's not hard to see that the man has been called out again for telling inaccuracies of all sorts and severities. Why, then, does he still have a stable 30 to 40% approval? Why on earth do his constituents, perhaps better called followers, still believe in and still believe him? First, we need to acknowledge that the U.S. has entered an era of populism and potentially oligarchy. This isn't the first time we've done it, but this is perhaps the most detrimental to our culture. The Gilded Age was also an era of populism, and William Jennings Bryan, also immortalized as the Lion in the Wizard of Oz, was populism's master. He was a phenomenal orator, and he used the hallmark of populism. He used plain speech, charisma, and emotion to dominate his audience. As Bryan so famously said, quote, "This is not a contest between persons. The humblest citizen in all the land, when clad in the armor of a righteous cause, is stronger than all the hosts of error. I come to you in defense of a cause as holy as the cause of liberty, the cause of humanity." Now, Sarah Palin would later call that humanity Joe the Plumber, and Trump would embrace the term deplorable, which was first famously used as an insult by Clinton. This wasn't Bryan's most terrifying quote, though, I just need to say. I think it must be, quote, "If we have to either give up religion or education, we should give up education." Thankfully, Bryan didn't win. So what, though, does this have to do with now? Well, it laid the groundwork for a second rise in blatant oration. Like I said, thankfully, Bryan's lost his election, but the groundwork was laid, and honestly, it was just a matter of time before we finally got our populist man behind the curtain. The thing with populists is that they run a cult of personality. They throw out hollow, easy-to-understand, but impossible-to-interpret catchphrases. It's basically the astrology of politics. Like astrology, those little bite-sized morsels of goodness are very appealing to certain types of people. When the quips are racist, misogynistic, religious, and exclusionary, you appeal to a very specific demographic within the United States. Namely, most die-hard Trump supporters. Now, I can get into how it was probably not a matter of blatant racism. I'm not saying Trump supporters are racist and misogynistic. I am saying, though, that there is a lot more implicit bias within that group. That is, though, unfortunately, a talk for another day. For now, though, just stay with me. So what happens when you call out a populist leader? When, say, the media says they're lying? Well, you just attacked them. See, the individuals who love those populist messages have a world that tends to be black and white. Compromise is weakness, and if you just stand your ground, you can use the victim card. It's common for populist messages to appeal to this desire to be correct, so that an individual can maintain their black and white worldview. See, here's how you do it. You frame something in the negative. For example, when talking to coal miners, tell them that the world is against them and that you're going to save them. Rant about how, like Bryan said, they are the backbone of the country and they deserve better, but all those big nasty cities are against their way of life. Now, when you fail to deliver what's been promised, you're still right. The cities are still out to get those poor coal miners, but you're the hero for trying your best, even if you didn't try at all or there was no industry to save. This preserves the individual's ability to believe. Don't ever just come out and tell the coal miners their industry is in its dying throes, because that doesn't fit into their worldview. To many, it's either go mine or do nothing, and obviously, they'd rather mine. What happens then for those few who see the trap in the message? Well, they have two choices. They can change their view, but remember again, though, that that's a compromise that doesn't fit well into a black and white perspective. Or they can justify their reason to continue to believe. This process then is called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the individual state of having beliefs or attitudes that are at odds with behavior. To simplify then, in this instance, the coal miners have this firm belief that the Republican Party will save them, but then they have no job to go to. If they'd been saved, they would be at work, but since they're not at work, their belief is incongruent with their behavior. So what happens there? Well, you can have a change in belief, but again, that's compromise, or you can have a lot of mental, uncomfortable gymnastics, deflection, blame, anger. A lot of anger. Anger towards the self and anger towards others. You hear slogans like, foreigners are coming to take our jobs, or outsourcing destroys communities. Sticking with the coal miner example, imagine now one throws back the curtain and sees the wizard. They take off the glasses and they see the Emerald City is white. Okay, there's still two choices. They can just put the glasses back on and make the city green again. Or like Dorothy, they can confront the wizard. In this instance, the coal miner can't directly confront the actual wizard, but they can change their perspective of them. Another choice, though, can be to use the idea of sunk cost. Basically, the more you invest in an idea, the harder it becomes to abandon it. This is a very common logical fallacy. You've spent your whole life being in a town of coal miners and an economy based on mining, training to become a miner. For right or wrong, at this point, you're too invested in the past to make a different step in the future. It's then easier to believe in the wizard because you're too deep to do otherwise. Now, of course, I've simplified things, but the reality is that it's not hard for anyone to fall into the trap, become a full-fledged believer, and then stay there. Unfortunately, the current administration is well aware of how to keep people in the personality trap. You shut down other sources of information, you slowly close the institutions of fact, and you hand out more glasses. Our current best hope, then, is that soon more people start seeing that the Emerald City is, in fact, white.
Dr. Harriet Hall, MD, known to thousands as the Skepdoc, a retired family physician and former Air Force flight surgeon. She writes about medicine, so-called complementary and alternative medicine, science, quackery, and critical thinking. Harriet now has a free course, a series of 10 video lectures on science-based medicine and alternative medicine. The videos and an accompanying course guide can be found by following the link at skepdoc.info or by visiting web.randy.org/educational-modules.html. Topics covered in the series are science-based medicine versus evidence-based medicine, what is CAM, chiropractic, acupuncture, homeopathy, naturopathy and herbal medicine, energy medicine, miscellaneous alternatives, pitfalls in research, and science-based medicine in the media and politics. Harriet covers each topic in a matter-of-fact, no-nonsense way that's sure to educate and entertain. Skepdoc.info.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Now, a couple of announcements from me. Don't forget the Australian Skeptics National Convention is coming up later in the year here in Sydney in October. Visit www.skeptics.com.au for more details. And over the coming months, I will be presenting interviews from some of the speakers. In fact, only a couple of weeks ago, you would have heard me interviewing Dr. Pamela Gay. Well, more interviews coming up with some of the speakers. That's very exciting. I'm really looking forward to that. I think the Australian Skeptics have a top lineup of speakers this year, and you'll be able to hear their story and look forward with me to meeting them in person later on in the year. I look forward to meeting people in California in only a few weeks at Skeptical. Again, links on the show notes in Berkeley. That should be great fun. I'm taking part in a quiz show, a skeptical type Jeopardy type quiz show. But I'll be running around with my microphone interviewing people, and it'd be nice to see you if you're in the area. More details at the Skeptic Zone webpage. And finally, for those people in Bend, Oregon, Skeptoid Media is arranging for me to give a talk in Bend, Oregon. So more details as soon as they come to hand, but keep an eye on skepticzone.tv, but I'll be telling you more probably in the next episode. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.